My name is Chris Steed. I am the Executive Director of the Fullerton Foundation and the Hamlet Mills Foundation, based in Gaffney, South Carolina. How many of y'all have ever seen House of Cards? So like that's Gaffney's claim to fame. We are nothing like that guy, okay? But our foundation is a private family foundation, as I mentioned, and is into investing in health innovation in North and South Carolina. The vast majority of the work that we do is with physicians and physician education, and with medical schools and nursing programs across the 2 states. So it's a fun job and one that I enjoy. I have been working in the field of community service since I finished graduate school. So for years, 10 of those were spent at United Way of Piedmont over in Spartanburg, 7 as their Vice President of Community Impact, and 3 as their President and CEO. And then again, I've been with the foundation now for almost 2 years. I share all that with you to say that over the 16, 17 years that I've worked in this field, one of the things that I've learned is that the most critical way, or one of the most important ways that an individual like you and I can make a difference in the community that we live in is to serve on the board of a nonprofit organization. And so if you remember nothing else about our conversation over the next 45 minutes, hear me say this: your community desperately needs you. In whatever fashion it is that you're able to serve, and if you feel called to lead on the board of a nonprofit organization, I hope you'll take that seriously, because it is a wonderful, wonderful way to give back. So here's what I want to do. We're going to talk briefly about what a nonprofit is. And we're going to talk about the importance of boards of directors, what their responsibilities are, and we're going to end up with some conversation, I hope, about how it is that you assess whether or not you're ready to serve a nonprofit in that fashion. And if so, how do you find your niche within the community? So who's in? Show of hands. Like, okay, that was good. Just remember that the next 45 minutes is all it seems between you and beer. All right? Or wine or whatever. All right. So let's talk for a second about what a nonprofit organization is. Are there any educators in the room? Okay, thank God. Because all the teachers will tell you, right, in college and whatnot, that you're not supposed to use Wikipedia. I'm sorry, dude, I walk on him a lot. I hope that's okay. I'm being filmed. He gave me the knowing nod, like, this is what I do for a living. Shut up and keep going. All right. So any educator will tell you that Wikipedia is not where you go to find good scholarly information, but I don't care. I find this definition of a nonprofit organization pretty good. So if we go to Wikipedia and we say, all right, what is a nonprofit organization? Basically, it says that it's an institution that's mission-focused and that puts its revenue into mission and service, expanding the service of the organization rather than in paying dividends to a stockholder or to an owner, right? One of the things I'll argue is that how many of you actually work in the nonprofit field? I saw Amanda in the back. How are you? Right. So a good chunk of it. The rest of you work in banking, accounting, some other kind of field, right? I would dare you to try to think of another industry in the United States that defines itself by what it is not. But for whatever reason, we've adopted the expression or the term nonprofit to describe what it is that we do as an industry. The reality is that nonprofits are really not that different from for-profit organizations. If we were to look at the way Bank of America is organized compared to a local United Way, I think what you find is that the responsibilities of the board are almost identical. There is a board of directors of both institutions. They are ultimately responsible for the operation of the organization. There are characteristics of leadership and skill sets that are necessary on both types of boards. The major difference really is about what we do with the money that we make. Can nonprofit organizations make a profit? Yes, right? It's just what we do with the profit that separates us from for-profit institutions. So, enough about that. Let's talk about boards of directors. So, this is from the Foundation Group, which is a fairly well thought of think tank around nonprofit organizations in the country. This is probably a little longer than it needs to be. But the important thing for you to know is that nonprofit boards of directors are ultimately responsible for the operation of the organization. They are where the buck stops. When you agree to serve on the board of a nonprofit, when you let them put your name on their letterhead or file their IRS documents saying you're one of the people that governs the institution, you are then legally and ethically bound to that organization. As an executive director, we can walk away at any point. But as a member of the organization's board, you are legally and ethically bound to the institution. And so what we want to talk about is how to take that responsibility seriously and how to fulfill the responsibility that you have to an institution effectively. So if you were to go into any attorneys in the room? Oh, thank God. Okay, no attorneys. Just kidding. Some of my favorite people are attorneys. Thank you. That's a lie. I don't know any good attorneys. Oh, I already like you guys so much better than the first group. You're not laughing at any of my bad jokes. Okay. If you were to go into an attorney's office and you were to look up on their impressive shelf of the leather-bound books with the gold leaf writing in how we all picture lawyers' offices, right? You would not find one that says nonprofit law on it. And that is because in the United States, nonprofit organizations are wildly unregulated institutions. If you go to Canada, if you go to Europe, if you go to Australia, and you look at nonprofits or non-governmental organizations, which is what most of the rest of the world calls community service agencies, extremely well-regulated, and I don't mean well-regulated, probably over-regulated, right? In the United States, you're not going to find a central place where you can go to find all the rules that apply to our service as board members to a nonprofit organization. But if you got people like Amanda and I and a couple others of you that work in the nonprofit world, you gave us a glass of wine or a beer, and we started talking about really cool subjects like boardsmanship, which of course we all do. It's a fascinating conversation. You should get involved in it sometime. Eventually, you would center on a conversation about something called the Clow Doctrine. This is internationally, this is accepted as the foundation for what a board of directors does, whether it's a nonprofit or a for-profit. Boards of directors have three basic duties: the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, and the duty of obedience. The duty of care speaks to the responsibility we have to exercise good stewardship over the resources that the institution we serve has, to make sure that the money and the volunteer time and the equipment and the other things that make up the institution, that those are used properly. The legal language is that we are to exercise the same level of oversight that an ordinarily prudent person would in a similar circumstance, right? So basically, are the resources being used appropriately? Are they being used for their mission? The duty of loyalty talks about our responsibility to show allegiance to the organization when we're making a decision. So a big part of service on a nonprofit board is helping the organization make extremely important decisions. And a lot of those have to do with the use of the institution's resources. And so when we're doing that, when we're sitting in the boardroom, acting as a corporate body, and we're having conversation about whether or not to award a contract, or to make a facility improvement, or to expand services into another area, we have to make sure that our vote is being put in place because we believe that that's what is best for the institution and our mission, and not because of something that maybe benefits us personally, or because we would really like to see XYZ institution not open a thrift store on our side of town, right? Nothing against thrift stores. I'm a big fan. All right. And then lastly, the duty of obedience. And that is our responsibility to act in a way that is in line with the organization's mission, vision, and values. So that means is that if we care enough about an organization's cause to serve on the board, we can't act differently in the boardroom than we do in our everyday lives. So if we're passionate about children's literacy in the boardroom, then that needs to be something that carries out in our personal lives as well. Michael Vick is not going to serve on the board of the Atlanta Humane Society. Yeah, it's a really old reference, but I've been teaching this since 2008, and that's just part of my scripts. Any of the rest of you can come up with a better one. I encourage you to slip it to me on the way out. I'll pay you an appreciation. But the idea is that we're going to act in a way in the community that's consistent with the mission of the institution, that we're not going to isolate our support of a cause to the time that we spend with the board of directors. So if we expand on that, if we take those duties of care, loyalty, and obedience, and we go into a little bit more detail and look at the specific things that we do when we fulfill our CLO responsibilities, we come to something that's a document or a tome that's put together called the 10 Basic Board Responsibilities. This is from BoardSource, It is internationally accepted as sort of the Bible for nonprofit boards. It's a relatively short booklet, but includes great information that has been adopted by the Secretary of State in most states in the United States. That's the state level official that typically governs nonprofits in a state. It's sort of the black and white, the 10 Commandments of service on a nonprofit board. So let's run through those fairly quickly. The first is that as a board member, it's your responsibility to determine the organization's mission and purpose. So when does that typically happen? Come on, there's like 50 of you, somebody. It's typically when we establish the core purpose of the institution, right? So for those of us, maybe our organization that we're serving was founded 50, 100 years ago. For those of us that come after that sort of founding group, our responsibility is to steward the mission, to make sure that we're adhering to the mission when we make decisions, and to evaluate the effectiveness of the mission periodically. So let's talk for a couple things about mission and vision and what an effective mission actually looks like. So a lot of times in our work or in our service life, we hear people talk about mission, vision, and values. So what are the differences between those three sort of constructs with them, particularly as they relate to a nonprofit organization? What are values? They're characteristics, they are components of how we make decisions, they are principles that the organization holds very dear, right? If it's a faith-based institution, it may be based in Christian principles or Jewish principles or so on, right? Most organizations now will have some statement in their values about diversity and inclusion. Most organizations that serve people will talk about integrity and the word that just flew out of my head. No, that's not the right word. Keep going with it. Oh, I can't think of what it is. Cut that out of the tape. That's going to drive me nuts. I'll call all of you at 3 in the morning when that word comes to me. But the idea being that all people have worth, right? Anybody come up with that word for me real quick? Seriously. Equality? That's not it. All right, I'm getting over it. I'm going to pass later. In like 15 minutes when I just randomly scream out a word in front of you, you'll know that that was the word that I was trying to come up with earlier. So at any rate, we have stated, we spent like 5 minutes on that. I still can't think of the damn word. All right. So the values are words or phrases, principles that sort of guide our decision making that are important to us as an institution, right? Mission is what we do. So an organization will state in their mission that they are here to improve literacy in Greenville County for children under the age of 6, or somebody who was with Habitat talked to me about that online. Maybe it was the girl in the last class. So Habitat is about addressing homelessness by providing families with opportunities for homeownership. So if you look through the window at the activities of the organization as they're happening, then typically that's the mission. The vision is what will happen, what the world will look like, what our community will look like when we fully accomplish our mission. So the vision is typically for Habitat, a world without homelessness, right? For literacy, it is every child entering kindergarten ready to learn. Okay. The mission, so the vision is what we hope to accomplish. The mission is what we do. Is it okay for you as a member of a board or as a representative of a nonprofit to talk about changing your mission? Is that allowed?
Yes.
It is. It is absolutely allowed. And lots of times we'll have conversations about the relevance of our mission, meaning how well understood is it by other people? How inspiring is it? How does it incite people to get involved with the institution? Mission statements should be a single sentence. They should have minimal punctuation. They should have minimal polysyllabic words, right? Don't put the word polysyllabic in your mission. And they should be easily understood by somebody with a 5th grade education. But beyond that, it should be descriptive of what it is that you do. So we change the wording sometimes to make it relevant to the way people talk, or to make sure that the words we use are descriptive of how of the services that we provide. Do organizations ever whole scale change what they do? Their purpose, their core population that they work with, is that allowed? It is, but it's not advised, right? So perfectly within your right as the board of a nonprofit to change the mission completely. But that doesn't typically happen every year, every other year, right? That's something that typically only happens when the mission is accomplished. How many of y'all ever heard of March of Dimes? Everybody's heard of March of Dimes. March of Dimes was founded in the late 20s, early 30s to do what? This is a younger crowd. They were established in the 20s and 30s. There were some old people in the last class, and they were able to answer for all of you. March of Dimes was established in the 20s and 30s to eradicate polio from the United States, right? So 60s, 70s, 80s, roughly, we accomplished that, right? We've met that objective for the most part. So now what is March of Dimes about? Premature babies, birth defects, right? So that's an organization that really did whole-scale change what they were about, but it was not because they gave up, it was because mission was accomplished. So all that to say, yeah, you can change your mission. Absolutely, you should make sure that the statement and the mission and how you present it is relevant to the people that you're trying to communicate it with. But as a general rule, we don't whole-scale change what the institution is about. Second, responsibility. It is your responsibility as the organization's board to decide who it is that's going to run the institution. And whether it's a volunteer position, a part-time position, a full-time, part-time, paid, not paid position, any of those, any combination of those things, the board decides who that person is. There's somebody that is ultimately responsible for the day-to-day operation of the institution. And that's the CEO or the executive director or the program director or whatever it is you choose to call them within the organization. And it's important for you as new board members to understand that you are that person's boss. As a corporate body, all of you collectively are the person that supervises and supports and monitors the work of the chief executive. And particularly for young professionals, that's sometimes difficult because the people who are serving as the director of these institutions is older than our parents in some cases, right? And they've been around forever. And maybe they knew you when you were this tall. But we can't allow those factors or characteristics of your relationship to impact the idea that at the end of the day, buck stops with the board of directors. And although the chief executive and the board should have an excellent working relationship together, the hierarchy is very clear about who's the final decision maker. So we want to make sure that not only do we select a good person, but that we establish their responsibilities, that we ensure that a qualified individual runs the organization, and that when we hire the CEO, that we've got a good onboarding process that helps acclimate them to the organization and the community. One thing we'll talk briefly about, and this is a very difficult facet of fulfilling this responsibility, but there are times when it's appropriate for an organization to change their leader, right? So what am I talking about? Sometimes you gotta ask the executive director to step down. And that's a responsibility that unfortunately not a whole lot of people like to do, and sometimes gets shirked. And it's easy to do because the board changes over every 3 or 4 years, and you think, well, we'll just leave this responsibility for the next person. I certainly don't want to encourage you to think that that's a decision that needs to be made lightly. But how many of you believe that at different points in an organization's development, they need different leadership? Most of us believe that, right? In keeping with that, the organization will need different leaders at different points in its development. And if you have an excellent CEO, they will be able to acknowledge when it's time for them to step aside and let somebody else with a different box of tools step up to the plate, right?